I watched my daughter-in-law Amanda slip something white into my champagne glass just moments before the toast at my retirement party. After building my tech consulting company from nothing and selling it for $36 million, this celebration should have been perfect. But as 50 guests raised their glasses in my Beverly Hills home, I pretended to stumble and quickly switched my glass with Amanda's mother, Patricia, who stood right beside me. Within seconds, Patricia drank the champagne, while Amanda smiled with satisfaction, completely unaware of what I had just done. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble foyer as guests moved through my home, celebrating 5 decades of relentless work that had finally paid off. I had spent the last 3 months planning this retirement party, wanting everything to be flawless. The catering staff from Monte Carlo restaurant moved gracefully between the 75 people who had gathered to honor my journey from a struggling single mother to a successful business owner. My son David looked handsome in his navy suit as he mingled with colleagues from my company, Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I had built that business from my kitchen table after his father died in a car accident 22 years ago. Back then, David was only 8 years old, and I worked 18-hour days to keep us afloat while learning everything about technology consulting. Every sleepless night, every rejected proposal, every small victory had led to this moment. Amanda stood near the marble fireplace, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her emerald dress catching the light. She had married David 3 years ago, and something about her had always felt calculated to me. The way she asked pointed questions about my finances, her sudden interest in my estate planning, the manner in which she steered conversations toward my business decisions. Tonight, those suspicions crystallized into cold certainty. Patricia, Amanda's mother, seemed pleasant enough. She was a retired teacher from Oregon who had flown in for the celebration. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple black dress with pearl earrings. She had been staying in my guest house for the past week, helping with party preparations and getting to know our family better. As the evening progressed, I noticed Amanda checking her watch repeatedly. She kept glancing toward the kitchen, where the champagne bottles were being opened for the toast. When she excused herself to use the restroom, I followed at a distance and saw her detour into the kitchen instead. Through the service window, I watched her approach the champagne tray and look around nervously before pulling a small plastic bag from her purse. My heart pounded as she emptied white powder into the glass that sat at the front of the tray. The server had already explained that the front glass was specifically marked for me as the guest of honor. Amanda knew exactly which glass would end up in my hands. She stirred the champagne quickly with a silver spoon and returned the bag to her purse, smoothing her dress and walking back toward the living room with a satisfied expression. I remained hidden behind the kitchen door, processing what I had just witnessed. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. My own daughter-in-law had just poisoned my drink at my retirement celebration, surrounded by people who loved and respected me. The betrayal cut deeper than any business setback I had ever experienced. When the servers brought out the champagne tray 15 minutes later, I positioned myself strategically. Patricia stood to my right, David to my left, and Amanda directly across from me. The server handed me the tainted glass, exactly as Amanda had planned. I held it carefully, noting the slight cloudiness that normal champagne should not have. My longtime business partner Robert Chen raised his glass first. We had worked together for 12 years before I bought out his shares, when he decided to move to Seattle. To Sylvia Martinez, he announced, a woman who turned impossible dreams into remarkable reality. The room erupted in applause, and I felt genuine warmth from people who had watched me struggle and succeed. As everyone lifted their glasses, I made my move. "Oh!" I exclaimed, pretending to lose my balance slightly, and bumping into Patricia. In the brief moment of confusion, I switched our glasses with practiced precision. Years of negotiating million-dollar contracts had taught me to move quickly when opportunities presented themselves. Patricia smiled kindly and steadied me with her free hand. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked with genuine concern. I nodded and thanked her, watching as Amanda's eyes fixed on the glass now in my hand, completely unaware that it was no longer the same one. "To new beginnings," I said, raising the clean glass toward the chandelier. Everyone echoed the sentiment, and we all drank together. I sipped carefully while watching Patricia drain her glass completely. Amanda's smile grew wider as she assumed her plan was working perfectly. Within 3 minutes, Patricia began blinking rapidly. Her face flushed, and she swayed slightly before gripping the back of a leather armchair. "I feel quite dizzy," she murmured, her words beginning to slur. Amanda was standing just 10 feet away, chatting with David about their upcoming vacation plans, showing absolutely no concern for her mother's obvious distress. "Patricia, are you feeling well?" I asked loudly enough for others to hear. She tried to respond but stumbled forward, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the Persian rug. Several guests rushed to help her, while others stepped back in shock. Dr. Williams, my longtime physician who was attending the party, immediately knelt beside her and checked her pulse. "Call 911, he instructed firmly. "Her heartbeat is irregular, and her pupils are dilated. She needs medical attention immediately." I watched Amanda's face carefully during this announcement. Instead of maternal panic or desperate concern, she displayed mild irritation, as if Patricia's collapse was an inconvenience rather than a medical emergency. David knelt beside Patricia, holding her hand and speaking softly to keep her calm. "Help is coming," he assured her. "Just try to stay awake." But Amanda remained across the room, whispering something into her phone, while glancing repeatedly in my direction. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, their equipment clattering as they worked to stabilize Patricia. They asked rapid-fire questions about her medical history, any medications she might be taking, and what she had consumed at the party. As they prepared to transport her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, I heard Amanda speaking quietly to David near the front door. "This is exactly what I was worried about," she murmured, her voice carrying just far enough for me to overhear. "Your mother has been so scattered lately, mixing up her medications, forgetting things. She probably gave Patricia something dangerous by accident, maybe heart medication or blood pressure pills mixed with alcohol." The calculated coldness in her voice sent chills through me. Amanda was already constructing a narrative to blame me for what she had done to her own mother. As the ambulance disappeared down the winding driveway, I realized this poisoning was just the beginning of something much more sinister. While helping clean up after the guests departed, I noticed Amanda step onto the back patio to make another phone call. I moved closer to the sliding glass door and heard her speaking in hushed tones. "Phase 1 complete. She took the bait exactly like we planned. Now we move to Phase 2, once Mother wakes up and gives her statement." My blood turned to ice as I understood that Patricia's poisoning was not the end goal but merely the opening move in a larger scheme. Whatever Amanda had planned for me was just beginning, and I was the intended target who had accidentally escaped the first attack. But now, I had something Amanda did not know I possessed. The knowledge that she was my enemy, while she still believed I was her unsuspecting victim. The fluorescent lights at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center cast everything in harsh, clinical tones as I sat in the emergency room waiting area. David paced near the vending machines, while Amanda filled out paperwork with unusual efficiency, as if she had prepared for this exact scenario. Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending emergency physician, emerged from Patricia's room after 2 hours of tests and treatment. "She's stable now," Dr. Kim announced, "but we found something concerning in her blood work. She has significant levels of zolpidem and diphenhydramine in her system. That's a powerful sleep aid combined with an antihistamine. This combination can cause severe sedation, confusion, and potentially dangerous drops in blood pressure." I watched Amanda's face carefully during this explanation. She nodded with appropriate concern, but her eyes held no surprise. This was information she already possessed because she had created the situation herself. "Could this have been accidental?" David asked, running his hands through his dark hair. "Maybe she took some sleep medication and forgot about it before drinking alcohol?" Dr. Kim shook her head. "The levels are too high for normal dosing, and Patricia insisted she takes no sleep aids. Someone would need to deliberately administer this amount to cause these symptoms. We're required to report this as a possible poisoning case to the authorities." Amanda stepped forward with practiced ease. "Doctor, I hate to suggest this, but David's mother has been having some memory issues lately. She's been forgetting conversations, misplacing things, and we've been worried about early cognitive decline." Is it possible she might have given Patricia something without realizing it? The audacity of this lie took my breath away. Amanda was using my momentary confusion from months of being gradually poisoned to paint me as mentally incompetent. Doctor. Kim looked at me with new scrutiny, and I could see the seeds of doubt being planted in her mind. Mrs. Martinez, have you been experiencing any memory problems or confusion recently? The doctor asked gently. I knew that answering truthfully about my recent symptoms would only support Amanda's narrative, but lying would be discovered eventually. I have felt unusually tired and occasionally foggy over the past few months, I admitted carefully, but I would never give anyone medication without their knowledge, and I certainly didn't give Patricia anything tonight. Amanda placed her hand on David's arm with apparent sympathy. We've all been concerned about her, especially since she's been living alone in that big house. Maybe it's time to consider some additional support or supervision. The manipulation was masterful and terrifying. Amanda was transforming me from a sharp businesswoman into a confused elderly woman who posed a danger to others. I realized I needed to gather evidence quickly before her narrative became accepted reality. After leaving the hospital, I drove home alone while David and Amanda remained with Patricia. My house felt different now, no longer the sanctuary I had built, but potentially a crime scene where I had been systematically victimized. I went directly to my home office and retrieved the coffee mug I had used that morning, carefully placing it in a plastic bag. The next morning, I drove to LabCorp and requested a comprehensive drug screening for myself, paying cash to keep the results private. I also asked them to test the residue in my coffee mug. The technician seemed surprised by my request, but agreed to process both samples. While waiting for those results, I began investigating other possibilities. I reviewed my home security system, which recorded both interior and exterior areas continuously. Most people forgot about the cameras after the first few weeks, and I suspected Amanda had grown comfortable enough to act naturally around them. I spent hours reviewing footage from the past 3 months, focusing on times when Amanda had been alone in my kitchen. What I discovered made me nauseated. On 17 different occasions, I watched her open my medication bottles, examine the contents, and add white powder to my coffee maker. She had been systematically drugging me for months with the same substances that had hospitalized her mother. But there was more. The cameras also captured Amanda, photographing documents from my desk, copying files from my computer when she thought I was napping, and making detailed notes about my financial accounts. She had been conducting surveillance on my entire life, while slowly poisoning me into a state where my testimony about her activities would be dismissed as confusion or paranoia. The lab results confirmed my worst fears. My blood contained the same combination of zolpidem and diphenhydramine found in Patricia's system, though at lower levels consistent with chronic exposure. The coffee mug showed even higher concentrations, proving that someone had been adding these substances to my morning routine regularly. I now understood Amanda's complete strategy. She had been gradually undermining my mental capacity while gathering information about my finances. Patricia's dramatic collapse at my retirement party was meant to establish a pattern of my dangerous incompetence with medications. The next step would likely involve having me declared mentally unfit to manage my affairs, with David and Amanda stepping in as my guardians. Armed with this evidence, I called my attorney, Margaret Foster, who had handled my business transactions for 15 years. Margaret, I need to see you immediately about a family emergency, I told her, and bring whatever paperwork we need to protect my assets from manipulation. We met at her office that afternoon, where I showed her the lab results and security footage. Margaret's expression grew increasingly grave as she reviewed the evidence. Sylvia, this is attempted financial elder abuse combined with systematic poisoning, she said bluntly. Amanda could face serious federal charges if we can prove intent. But we need to be very strategic about how we proceed. What do you mean? I asked. If we go to the authorities now, Amanda will claim you're having paranoid delusions brought on by cognitive decline. She's already established that narrative with the hospital staff. We need irrefutable evidence of her intentions before we make any accusations. Margaret helped me set up additional protections for my financial accounts and created a detailed medical directive establishing my mental competency as of that date. But she also warned me that Amanda was likely planning her next move while I was gathering evidence against her. That evening, I returned home to find David waiting in my living room. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he held a cup of tea. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened last night," he said quietly. "Amanda thinks we should consider getting you some help, maybe finding you a nice assisted living place where there are people to keep track of your medications." The betrayal cut through me like broken glass. My own son, whom I had raised and sacrificed everything for, was suggesting that I be removed from my home based on lies his wife had constructed. "David, I need you to listen very carefully," I said, sitting across from him. "I did not give Patricia any medication. I have never been confused about my prescriptions, and I am not experiencing cognitive decline." He looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "But Amanda showed me how you've been forgetting conversations, and Dr. Kim said the medication levels in Patricia's blood were really high." "When have I forgotten conversations?" I challenged him. "Give me a specific example." David struggled to provide details, eventually admitting that all of his concerns came from things Amanda had told him rather than situations he had witnessed directly. I realized that she had been manipulating him as systematically as she had been poisoning me. "I want to show you something," I said, leading him to my office computer. I played several clips of the security footage, showing Amanda adding substances to my coffee maker. David watched in stunned silence as his wife's criminal activity unfolded before his eyes. "This can't be real," he whispered. "Amanda wouldn't do this. There has to be some explanation." But as we watched more footage showing her photographing my financial documents and searching through my personal papers, David's denial began crumbling into horrified understanding. "She's been planning this for months," I explained gently. "The poisoning, the narrative about my mental decline, even Patricia's collapse last night. It's all part of a scheme to gain control over my estate." David buried his face in his hands as the full scope of his wife's betrayal became clear. "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have known. I should have protected you instead of doubting you." "You were being manipulated too," I assured him. "Amanda is very skilled at this kind of deception, but now we know the truth, and we can fight back." As we sat together planning our next steps, I realized that saving David from Amanda's influence was just as important as protecting myself from her schemes. My son was not my enemy but another one of her victims, and together we might be able to stop her before she destroyed our family completely. But I also knew that Amanda would not give up easily. She had invested too much time and effort into her plan to walk away quietly. The real confrontation was still coming, and I needed to be prepared for whatever she would try next. David spent the rest of that evening reviewing security footage with me, his face growing more ashen as we documented months of Amanda's systematic deception. Around midnight, he finally spoke the words that confirmed my worst fears about the extent of her manipulation. "Mom, there's something else I need to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Amanda has been threatening to take Emma and disappear if I don't help her convince you to sign over financial power of attorney to us." Emma was their 18-month-old daughter, my precious granddaughter with bright brown eyes and David's gentle smile. The thought of Amanda using that innocent child as leverage made my protective instincts surge. "She said if I didn't cooperate, she would file for divorce and make sure I never saw Emma again," David continued, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She has lawyers who specialize in custody cases, and she's been building evidence that I'm an unfit father." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. David pulled out his phone and showed me photographs that made my blood run cold. The images showed him apparently unconscious in bed with a blonde woman I didn't recognize. The pictures were clearly intimate, suggesting infidelity and reckless behavior. "These are completely fake," David said quickly. "I've never cheated on Amanda, and I don't even know this woman, but the photos look real enough to destroy me in a custody hearing." I studied the images more closely, noting how David's face seemed slightly blurred while the rest of the photo remained sharp. "How did she create these?" "She's been drugging my coffee too," he admitted, his shame evident. "Not every day like she was doing to you, but enough to make me unconscious for a few hours at a time. She would stage these scenes while I was sedated, using makeup and camera angles to create compromising situations." The scope of Amanda's manipulation was staggering. She had not only been poisoning me, and building a case for my incompetency, but simultaneously blackmailing her own husband into compliance through threats against his relationship with his daughter. "There's more," David said, showing me additional photos of himself appearing to snort white powder and holding what looked like illegal drugs. "She set up all of these situations while I was unconscious. If she releases these images, no family court would grant me custody of Emma." I realized that Amanda had been playing a much longer game than I initially understood. She had been systematically compromising everyone around her to ensure their compliance with her ultimate goal of accessing my wealth. "David, when did this start?" I asked gently. "About 6 months after Emma was born," he replied. "Amanda said we needed to think about Emma's future and financial security. She suggested we should become more involved in managing your estate planning. When I said that was your decision to make, she started showing me these photos and threatening to leave." "And you never thought to tell me?" David's face crumpled with guilt. "She said if I told anyone, she would immediately file for divorce and release all the photos publicly. My career would be destroyed. I'd lose Emma, and you would be humiliated by having a son involved in drug scandals and adultery." I thought I was protecting everyone by staying quiet. The cruelty of Amanda's strategy was breathtaking. She had isolated David completely, making him believe that his silence was protecting his family when it was actually enabling her crimes against all of us. "Show me your coffee mug," I said. David led me to the kitchen and pointed to a blue ceramic mug he used every morning. I bagged it carefully for testing, though I was already certain what the results would show. As we sat at my kitchen table planning our response, David revealed more details about Amanda's behavior over the past year. She had been asking increasingly specific questions about my business assets, my real estate holdings, and my retirement accounts. She had also been pushing for us to update my will to include more specific provisions for Emma's future. She kept saying that if anything happened to you unexpectedly, we needed to make sure Emma's inheritance was protected, David explained. "She wanted me to suggest that you establish a trust with her and me as co-trustees." "Did she ever mention specific amounts or percentages?" "She seemed to know exactly how much you got from selling the company," David said. "She would talk about the $36 million like she had seen documentation proving it." This confirmed that Amanda had been accessing my financial records during her searches of my office. She knew precisely what she was trying to steal, and had calculated the exact steps needed to gain control over it. "David, I need you to understand something important," I said, taking his hands in mine. "None of this is your fault. Amanda is a professional manipulator who created impossible situations where any choice you made would hurt someone you love. That's not weakness on your part, that's psychological warfare on hers." "But I should have seen through it," he insisted. "I should have known she was lying. People who love and trust their partners don't expect this level of deception," I explained. "Amanda exploited your good faith and your protective instincts. The fact that you cared more about Emma's welfare than your own comfort shows your character, not your weakness." As dawn approached, we had documented enough evidence to present a compelling case to law enforcement. But I knew we needed one more piece of the puzzle. Amanda's true motivation for targeting our family specifically. Her scheme was too sophisticated and personal to be random opportunism. "David, what do you know about Amanda's background, her family history, her life before she met you?" He thought carefully. "She said her father died when she was young, and her mother Patricia raised her alone. They moved around a lot when she was growing up because Patricia's teaching jobs were always temporary. Amanda went to college on scholarships and worked in marketing before we met." "Did she ever mention her father's name or how he died?" "Robert something," David said slowly. "She said it was a heart attack related to work stress, but she never talked about it much. She claimed it was too painful to discuss." Robert. The name triggered a memory that sent chills through me, but I needed to verify my suspicions before sharing them with David. If I was right about Amanda's true identity, her attack on our family was not random financial opportunism, but carefully planned revenge for events that happened years before David ever met her. "I need to make some phone calls and do some research," I told David. "Can you stay here today and help me gather more evidence?" "Of course," he replied. "But Mom, what are we going to do about Emma?" I can't let Amanda take her away, especially now that I know how dangerous she really is. We're going to protect Emma and expose Amanda, I promised. But we need to be very careful about timing and evidence. Amanda has been planning this for months, and she won't give up easily when she realizes we've discovered her scheme. As David settled into the guest room to rest after our long night of revelations, I began researching Amanda's background with the intensity I had once applied to investigating potential business partners. If my suspicions about her father Robert were correct, everything about her presence in our lives had been calculated from the very beginning. The woman my son had married and trusted with his daughter was not who she claimed to be, and understanding her true identity was the key to stopping her before she destroyed what remained of our family. I spent the morning conducting the kind of thorough background investigation that I should have insisted upon before Amanda joined our family. Using the research techniques I had developed during decades of business due diligence, I began piecing together her true identity and discovering connections that made my suspicions crystallize into horrifying certainty. The breakthrough came when I searched business records for Robert Morrison rather than the more common Robert Johnson or Robert Smith. Robert Morrison had been my business partner at Pinnacle Tech Solutions from 2004 until 2009, when I discovered he had been embezzling client funds and manipulating contracts to funnel money into personal accounts. The investigation and legal proceedings that followed had been devastating for Robert. He lost his professional reputation, his family's savings, and ultimately his freedom when he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and money laundering. I remembered testifying at his trial, watching him stare at me with pure hatred as the judge delivered the verdict that would destroy his life. Robert Morrison died of a massive heart attack in his prison cell 3 years into his sentence. He left behind a wife named Patricia and a 22-year-old daughter named Jessica. Jessica Morrison, not Amanda Morrison, as she had told David. I printed out newspaper articles from Robert's trial and death, comparing the grainy photos of his family to the woman who had married my son. The resemblance was unmistakable once I knew what to look for. Jessica had changed her hair color, lost weight, and altered her style, but the bone structure and facial features were identical. My phone rang as I finished reading Robert's obituary. David's voice was tense with urgency when I answered. "Mom, Amanda just called me. She's driving over here with Emma, and she sounded really angry. She said Patricia woke up and wants to talk to both of us about what happened at the party." "David, do not let them into the house," I said immediately. "Keep the doors locked and don't open them for anyone. But she has Emma with her. I can't keep my daughter outside." I realized that Amanda was escalating her timeline because she somehow suspected that her scheme was unraveling. "Listen carefully," I told David. "Amanda's real name is Jessica Morrison. She is the daughter of my former business partner, Robert Morrison, who went to prison for embezzling from our company. Her entire relationship with you has been designed to gain access to me for revenge." The silence on David's phone stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "You're saying she targeted me specifically? That she never loved me at all?" "I'm saying she spent years planning revenge against me for what happened to her father, and marrying you was part of that plan," I explained gently. "Everything about your relationship, even Emma's birth, has been calculated to position her for this moment." The sound of a car in my driveway interrupted our conversation. Through my window, I could see Amanda's white SUV parking near my front door. She emerged from the driver's seat, carrying Emma, who was dressed in a pink outfit and clutching her stuffed elephant. "She's here," I told David. "Whatever happens, remember that everything she says will be designed to manipulate our emotions. Don't believe anything without independent verification." I watched Amanda approach my front door with Patricia beside her. Patricia appeared completely healthy and alert, showing no signs of the severe drug reaction that had hospitalized her less than 24 hours earlier. This confirmed my suspicion that her collapse had been entirely staged for my benefit. When Amanda rang the doorbell, I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged. "What can I do for you?" I asked calmly. "Sylvia, we need to talk about what happened last night," Amanda said, shifting Emma to her other hip. "Patricia has some important information about how she ended up in the hospital." Patricia looks remarkably recovered for someone who was nearly comatose 12 hours ago, I observed. Patricia stepped forward with practiced concern. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I remember you offering me something to help me sleep before the party started. You said it would help with my anxiety about meeting so many new people. The fabrication was smoothly delivered, clearly rehearsed. Patricia was prepared to testify that I had deliberately given her drugs, establishing the pattern of dangerous behavior that Amanda needed for her incompetency case. That's a complete lie, I said firmly. I never offered you any medication, and you know it. Amanda's expression shifted to apparent sadness. Sylvia, this is exactly what we were worried about. You're becoming paranoid and defensive when people try to help you remember things correctly. I'm going to call David and have him come over, Amanda continued. We need to have a family discussion about getting you some professional evaluation. This situation with Patricia could have been fatal if Dr. Kim hadn't acted so quickly. David is already aware of everything that's been happening, I replied. Including your real identity, Jessica Morrison. The change in Amanda's face was immediate and chilling. The mask of concern vanished, replaced by the cold calculation I had glimpsed at the retirement party. She no longer needed to pretend. So you figured it out, she said flatly. I wondered how long your addled brain would take to make the connection. Patricia stepped closer, revealing the same hardness in her expression. Your testimony put my husband in prison, where he died alone and broken. You destroyed our family, and never showed a moment of remorse for what you did to us. Your husband was stealing money from clients and manipulating contracts, I replied. I exposed criminal behavior that was hurting innocent people. You could have handled it privately, Jessica snarled. You could have given him a chance to pay the money back and resign quietly. Instead, you destroyed his reputation and sent him to die in prison. The hatred in her voice was pure and focused, distilled through years of planning and preparation. I realized that no amount of reasoning or explanation would change her desire for revenge. Robert made his own choices, I said. I protected my clients and my business from theft. And now we're going to protect ourselves from you, Patricia added. Jessica has evidence that you've been experiencing cognitive decline and dangerous behavior. The hospital has records of you poisoning me with prescription drugs. David will testify that you've been forgetting conversations and acting erratically. What makes you think David will support your lies? I asked. Jessica smiled with cruel confidence. Because if he doesn't, these photos get released to his employer, his friends, and every family court in Los Angeles. She showed me her phone screen, displaying the compromising images of David that she had staged while he was unconscious. The threat was clear. Cooperate with her narrative, or watch her destroy David's life and take Emma away forever. You have 24 hours to sign documents transferring power of attorney to David, with me as the secondary administrator, Jessica demanded. If you refuse, or if you try to involve the authorities, David loses his daughter and his reputation. As she turned to leave with Patricia and Emma, Jessica delivered her final threat. We've already filed preliminary paperwork with the court requesting a competency evaluation based on Patricia's poisoning. The wheels are in motion, Sylvia. You can make this easy on everyone, or you can make it very difficult on David. Watching her drive away with my granddaughter, I realized that Jessica Morrison had planned every detail of her revenge with the precision of a military campaign. But she had made one critical error in her calculations. She assumed that discovering her scheme would leave me helpless and defeated. Instead, I now understood exactly who I was fighting and why. More importantly, I had evidence of her crimes and a clear picture of her methods. Jessica Morrison wanted to destroy me the way she believed I had destroyed her father. But she was about to learn that I had not built a multi-million-dollar business by surrendering when the battle became difficult. The real confrontation was about to begin, and this time I would be ready for her. After Jessica left with her ultimatum, I immediately called my attorney Margaret Foster and my private investigator contact, Frank Rodriguez, whom I had used for business security checks. Within 2 hours, they were both sitting in my living room, reviewing the evidence I had accumulated and planning our counterattack. This is far more complex than standard elder abuse, Margaret said, studying the security footage on my laptop. Jessica has committed multiple felonies: identity fraud, systematic poisoning, blackmail, conspiracy, and attempted theft by deception. But she's also built a sophisticated legal framework to support her story. Frank, a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime, was examining the staged photographs of David. "These are professionally crafted," he observed. "Someone with serious technical skills created these images. This wasn't amateur hour." "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" I asked. Margaret consulted her notes. "If Jessica has already filed competency evaluation paperwork, we could have a court-ordered psychiatric assessment within a week. Once that process starts, it becomes very difficult to stop, especially with Patricia's testimony about the poisoning." "But we have evidence that Patricia was lying," I protested. "We have evidence that you switched glasses," Frank corrected. "But proving that Patricia knew about the poisoning beforehand is much harder. She can claim she was an innocent victim who mistakenly believes you gave her drugs." I realized that Jessica's plan was even more sophisticated than I had initially understood. Even with video evidence of her adding substances to my coffee, she could argue that she was giving me vitamins or supplements that I had requested. The poisoning charge would rely on Patricia's testimony, and Patricia was prepared to lie under oath. "However," Margaret continued, "there is one aspect of this scheme that Jessica cannot explain away." She opened her briefcase and removed a stack of financial documents. "While you were being systematically drugged, someone was accessing your online banking and investment accounts from IP addresses registered to David and Jessica's home internet connection." Frank leaned forward with interest. "That's a different crime entirely. Unauthorized access to financial accounts carries federal penalties regardless of whether any money was actually stolen." Margaret nodded. "I've been working with your bank's security department since yesterday. They have detailed logs showing that someone used your login credentials to view account balances, download statements, and research transfer procedures. The access happened during times when you were not at home, according to your security system logs. Jessica was learning exactly how much money she was trying to steal," I realized. "More than that," Margaret continued. "She was also researching the specific legal procedures needed to gain control over your accounts. The browser history from those sessions shows extensive research into power of attorney requirements, competency evaluations, and estate guardianship laws. This evidence changed everything. Jessica could not claim she was innocently helping with my medications while simultaneously conducting unauthorized surveillance of my financial accounts. The computer forensics created an indisputable paper trail of criminal intent." "What's our next move?" I asked. Frank stood up and walked to my window, checking the street for any signs of surveillance. "We need to be very careful about timing," he said. "If we move too quickly, Jessica might escalate and follow through on her threats against David. But if we wait too long, the court competency process could become irreversible." "I have a plan," I announced, "but it requires Jessica to believe she's still in control." I explained my strategy to Margaret and Frank. Rather than confronting Jessica directly or immediately involving law enforcement, I would appear to capitulate to her demands while secretly documenting everything she did. The goal was to capture her admitting to the poisoning scheme and her real motivation for targeting our family. "That's extremely dangerous," Margaret warned. "If Jessica realizes you're recording her, she could become violent or disappear with Emma. But it's also our best chance to protect David and get his daughter back safely," I replied. "Jessica believes she holds all the advantages right now. Her confidence will make her careless." Frank nodded slowly. "If we can get her to explain her methods and motivations on recording, it would destroy any credibility she has with the courts or law enforcement." We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up surveillance equipment throughout my house. Frank installed tiny wireless cameras and audio recording devices in my living room, kitchen, and office. Everything would be transmitted to a secure server that could be accessed remotely as evidence. That evening, I called Jessica and arranged to meet the following day to discuss the power of attorney documents. I made my voice sound defeated and confused, playing the role of the mentally declining elderly woman she expected me to be. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her. "Maybe you're right that I need help managing things. I don't want to cause any more problems for the family." Jessica's voice carried smug satisfaction when she replied, "I'm glad you're being reasonable, Sylvia. This is really for your own protection, and it will give David peace of mind knowing that your affairs are being handled properly. I'd like Patricia to be there too," I added. "Since she was the one hurt by my mistake with the medications, I want to apologize to her personally." "Of course," Jessica agreed. "We'll come by around 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And Sylvia, please don't mention any of this to David yet. I want to surprise him with how well you're handling the transition." After ending the call, I sat in my living room surrounded by hidden cameras and microphones, preparing for what I knew would be the most important performance of my life. Jessica Morrison wanted revenge for her father's crimes, but she was about to discover that the woman who had built a business empire and exposed $1 million embezzlement scheme was not as easy to destroy as she had assumed. Tomorrow, I would give Jessica exactly what she wanted, the opportunity to gloat about her successful revenge. But while she was celebrating her victory, every word would be recorded as evidence of her crimes. She had spent 3 years manipulating my son and planning my destruction. Now it was my turn to show her what real strategic planning looked like. The next morning, I reviewed my strategy one final time with Margaret and Frank, who would be monitoring the hidden surveillance equipment from a van parked down the street. If anything went wrong during the confrontation, they would be ready to intervene immediately. "Remember," Frank cautioned, "your goal is to get Jessica talking about her methods and motivations. Let her think she's won, and her ego will do the rest." "And if she becomes suspicious or aggressive?" I asked. "You have panic buttons in 3 different rooms," Margaret replied. "Press any of them, and we'll be inside within 30 seconds. As 2 o'clock approached, I positioned myself in the living room where the audio and video quality would be optimal. I had dressed in slightly rumpled clothes and messed my hair to appear more fragile and defeated than usual. Every detail needed to support Jessica's belief that her psychological warfare had succeeded. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Jessica holding a briefcase full of legal documents, with Patricia standing beside her wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed justice was finally being served. Emma was not with them, which meant Jessica had left my granddaughter somewhere safe while she conducted this final confrontation. "Hello, Sylvia," Jessica said with false warmth. "Are you ready to take care of these important documents?" "Yes," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. "I want to do whatever is best for everyone." As they settled into my living room, Jessica opened her briefcase and spread power of attorney forms across my coffee table. The hidden cameras captured every document, every signature line, and every detail of what she was asking me to sign away. But more importantly, they were about to capture Jessica Morrison, confessing to 3 years of systematic crimes against my family, believing she was finally achieving the revenge she had planned since her father died in prison. The trap was set, and Jessica was walking directly into it. Jessica arranged the legal documents on my coffee table with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. Patricia sat beside her, radiating the cold satisfaction of a woman who believed she was finally witnessing justice for her husband's death. "Before we begin with the paperwork," I said, settling into my armchair, "I want to understand exactly what happened with Patricia's situation at the party. I'm still confused about how the medications got mixed up." Jessica and Patricia exchanged a quick glance, and I could see Jessica calculating how much of the truth she could reveal without risking her legal position. "Honestly, Sylvia," Jessica began, "I think you've been more confused lately than you realize. Patricia told me you offered her some pills to help with anxiety before the party, and you probably forgot about it afterward. But I don't understand how that could have happened," I pressed. "I don't have anxiety medication, and I certainly wouldn't give prescription drugs to someone else." Patricia leaned forward with practiced concern. "Dear, you pulled a small bottle from your purse and said they were herbal supplements that would help me feel more relaxed. You seemed so sure about what you were doing." The lie was delivered smoothly, but I noticed Jessica watching Patricia carefully to ensure she stuck to their rehearsed story. This was my opening to push them toward revealing more truth. "I'm so embarrassed about causing such a dangerous situation," I said, injecting shame into my voice. "How did you know to switch my glass with Patricia's?" "That was very clever thinking." Jessica's eyes sharpened with interest. She had not expected me to bring up the glass switch voluntarily. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "At the toast," I explained. "When I pretended to stumble and switched glasses with Patricia, I saw you put something in my champagne, so I made sure she got it instead." The silence in the room was electric. Jessica and Patricia stared at me as they processed what I had just revealed. I had not only admitted to witnessing Jessica's crime, but also to deliberately redirecting it toward Patricia. "You saw me put something in your glass?" Jessica asked slowly. "Of course," I replied. "I watched you add white powder to the champagne and stir it. When you walked away looking so satisfied, I knew you were trying to drug me the same way you'd been drugging my coffee for months." Patricia's face went pale as she realized their entire story had just collapsed. If I had deliberately switched glasses, knowing the champagne was drugged, then her testimony about me accidentally giving her medication became impossible to maintain. Jessica stood up abruptly, her mask of concern falling away completely. "You manipulative old woman," she snarled. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you married David to get revenge for your father Robert Morrison's prison sentence," I replied calmly. The use of her real name and her father's identity hit Jessica like a physical blow. She sat back down heavily, staring at me with pure hatred. "So you figured it out," she said flatly. "I was wondering when your addled brain would make the connection. Your father was stealing money from our clients," I continued. "I had a responsibility to stop him and protect innocent people from financial fraud." "You destroyed him!" Jessica shouted, abandoning any pretense of control. "You could have handled it privately, given him a chance to pay back the money, but instead you had to play the righteous hero and send him to prison. He embezzled over $2 million, I replied. "That wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was systematic theft that hurt families who trusted our company." Patricia spoke up with bitter anger. "He died in that prison cell because of you. My husband had a heart attack alone in a cage because you needed to prove how ethical you were. And now you're going to pay for what you did to our family," Jessica added. "David will lose his daughter, you'll lose your money, and everyone will know you as the crazy old woman who poisoned her own family." The hidden cameras were capturing every word of their confession, but I needed more details about their methods for the recordings to be legally useful. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Jessica laughed with cruel satisfaction. 3 years of meticulous preparation. I researched your family, your habits, your weaknesses. I created a completely new identity and engineered a meeting with David at that conference in San Diego. Everything about our relationship has been designed to position me for this moment. "Even Emma?" I asked, thinking of my innocent granddaughter. "Especially Emma," Jessica replied coldly. "That child is the perfect leverage to control David. He'll do anything to protect his access to his daughter, including testifying that you've been acting confused and dangerous." "And the poisoning?" I pressed. Patricia answered with pride in her voice. "We've been giving you small doses of sleep medication and antihistamines for months, making you foggy and tired so people would start noticing cognitive decline. The plan was to gradually increase the doses until you became obviously impaired. But you got impatient," I observed. "The retirement party was the perfect opportunity," Jessica explained. "A dramatic collapse caused by your medication error would establish the pattern we needed for incompetency proceedings. Patricia was supposed to be unconscious, not coherent enough to point fingers." "What went wrong?" I asked. Jessica's face twisted with frustration. "You switched the glasses. Patricia had to drink the full dose we prepared for you, and she had to pretend to be more affected than she actually was. The whole thing looked too staged. But we recovered quickly," Patricia added. "My testimony about you giving me anxiety medication still supports our story about your cognitive problems. Except now I have recordings of you admitting to systematic poisoning, identity fraud, and conspiracy," I said calmly. Jessica and Patricia froze as they processed my words. Jessica's eyes darted around the room, suddenly aware that our conversation might not be as private as she had assumed. "You're lying," she said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "Hidden cameras in multiple locations," I confirmed. "Audio and video documentation of everything you've said in the last 20 minutes. including your confessions to poisoning me, blackmailing David, and using Emma as leverage. Jessica lunged toward me, but I pressed the panic button concealed in my chair cushion. Within seconds, Frank Rodriguez burst through my front door with two FBI agents who had been waiting in the surveillance van. Jessica Morrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy, systematic poisoning, identity fraud, and attempted theft by deception, Frank announced as the agents handcuffed both women. As they were led away, Jessica screamed threats about destroying David and taking Emma away forever. But her leverage had evaporated the moment she confessed to her crimes on camera. The sophisticated revenge scheme she had spent 3 years planning had collapsed in 20 minutes of arrogant gloating. David arrived as the FBI van was pulling away from my house. He had been waiting at a safe location with Emma, ready to bring his daughter home once Jessica was in custody. "Is it over?" he asked, holding Emma tightly against his chest. "It's over," I confirmed. "Jessica will be facing federal charges, and we have enough evidence to ensure she never threatens our family again." As we sat in my living room with Emma playing happily on the floor, David looked at me with deep gratitude and lingering guilt. "Mom, I'm so sorry I doubted you. I should have seen through her manipulation sooner. You were protecting your daughter the only way you knew how," I replied. "Jessica is a professional manipulator who spent years perfecting her deception. The fact that you finally chose to trust me and help gather evidence shows your character." Frank Rodriguez returned that evening to explain the legal proceedings that would follow. Jessica and Patricia would be facing multiple federal charges carrying potential sentences of 15 to 20 years in prison. The evidence we had gathered was overwhelming, and prosecutors expected both women to accept plea bargains rather than risk trial. "What about Emma's custody?" David asked anxiously. "Jessica will lose all parental rights," Frank assured him. "Her crimes against your family automatically terminate her legal standing as a parent. You'll have full custody with no visitation requirements." As night fell, I sat in my garden, watching David push Emma on the swing set I had installed when she learned to walk. 3 years of careful manipulation and systematic poisoning had been undone in a single afternoon of recorded confessions. Jessica Morrison had wanted revenge for her father's crimes, but she had chosen to become a criminal herself in pursuit of it. Now she would face the same justice system that had held her father accountable, while the family she had tried to destroy remained strong and united. The woman who had poisoned my coffee and threatened my granddaughter was going to prison, but more importantly, my son and I had learned that we could trust each other, even when everything seemed hopeless. That was worth more than any revenge Jessica could have imagined. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, watching Jessica Morrison receive a sentence of 18 years in prison for conspiracy, systematic poisoning, identity fraud, attempted theft, and blackmail. Patricia received 8 years as an accomplice. The judge's words still echoed in my mind as I drove home. This was a calculated and cruel attack on vulnerable family members, motivated by misplaced revenge for crimes the defendant's own family member had committed. David had testified with quiet dignity about the psychological manipulation he had endured, and the court had been especially harsh in condemning Jessica's use of their infant daughter as leverage for blackmail. Emma's custody was permanently and solely awarded to David, with Jessica losing all parental rights. The personal healing took longer than the legal resolution. David entered therapy to process the guilt and manipulation he had experienced, and slowly began rebuilding his confidence as a father and son. I underwent medical treatment to completely clear the drugs from my system and regain the energy that had been sapped by months of poisoning. Emma, now 2 years old, thrived in the stable environment David and I created together. She had no memory of the chaos her mother had caused, and we were determined to keep it that way. David moved into my guest house, which gave him independence, while ensuring Emma had both her father and grandmother actively involved in her daily life. The FBI investigation revealed that Jessica and Patricia had attempted similar schemes against 2 other wealthy elderly women in Oregon and Nevada. Their previous victims had been less fortunate, losing significant amounts of money before the fraud was discovered. Our case provided the evidence needed to prosecute those crimes as well, ensuring justice for families who had not been able to fight back effectively. I used part of my retirement money to establish the Robert Morrison Foundation, which seemed appropriately ironic. The foundation provided resources to help elderly Americans protect themselves from financial abuse and manipulation. We offered free legal consultations, security assessments, and educational programs about recognizing manipulation tactics. The work gave me a sense of purpose that retirement alone could not provide. Every week, I met with families who were struggling with situations similar to what we had endured. Some involved adult children exploiting aging parents. Others featured romantic partners targeting widows or widowers for their assets. Each case reinforced my understanding of how easily trust could be weaponized against loving people. David became the foundation's technology director, using his business skills to develop online resources and security tools. He found healing in helping other families avoid the manipulation he had experienced. Emma often played in the foundation office, surrounded by people who loved her and would protect her from anyone who might try to exploit her innocence. 1 year after Jessica's sentencing, David met Sarah, a pediatric nurse who worked at the Children's Hospital, where Emma received her regular checkups. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, with both of them committed to ensuring that Emma's well-being remained the primary consideration. Sarah understood the trauma our family had endured and never tried to push for a faster timeline than David was comfortable with. When David asked for my thoughts about his relationship with Sarah, I told him something I had learned through our ordeal. Trust your instincts, but verify with evidence. Love should make your life more stable and peaceful, not more complicated and stressful. If someone truly cares about you, they will respect your need to protect your daughter and rebuild your life at your own pace. Sarah proved herself through consistent actions over many months. She never asked intrusive questions about our finances, never pushed for access to Emma before David was ready, and never made demands that would compromise his judgment. When Emma began calling her Miss Sarah and running to hug her during visits, I knew David had found someone whose intentions were genuine. As I write this, Emma is now 3 years old, speaking in complete sentences and showing early signs of inheriting her grandfather's analytical mind. She asks endless questions about everything she observes, and I love watching David patiently explain how airplanes fly, why flowers need water, and where the moon goes during daytime. The greatest lesson I learned from Jessica Morrison's attack on our family was the importance of distinguishing between enemies and victims. David had made mistakes by staying silent about Jessica's threats, but he had been trapped in an impossible situation designed by someone who exploited his love for his daughter. Recognizing that he needed rescue rather than punishment allowed us to work together instead of against each other. I also learned that financial success means nothing without the wisdom to protect it from those who would use it to harm the people you love. Jessica had seen my $36 million as validation that I owed her compensation for her father's choices. She never understood that Robert Morrison's crimes were his own responsibility, and that seeking revenge against his victims only proved that she had inherited his moral failures along with his resentments. The Foundation's work has shown me that elder abuse often succeeds because victims are ashamed to admit they have been manipulated by people they trusted. Breaking that cycle requires creating safe spaces where people can seek help without fear of judgment or blame. Every person who calls our helpline, attends our workshops, or requests a consultation represents another family that might avoid the trauma we endured. Today, Emma and I planted tomatoes in my garden, while David and Sarah prepared lunch in the kitchen. Watching my granddaughter carefully place seeds in the soil, I thought about the patient work of building trust and security after experiencing betrayal. Some damage takes years to heal completely, but with consistent care and protection, even the most wounded relationships can grow stronger than they were before. Jessica Morrison wanted to destroy my family as revenge for her father's imprisonment, but instead she gave us the opportunity to prove that love and wisdom are more powerful than hatred and manipulation. We emerged from her attack closer to each other and more committed to protecting others from similar predators. The money she tried to steal now funds programs that help vulnerable people recognize manipulation before it destroys their lives. The son she tried to turn against me became my strongest ally and closest collaborator. The granddaughter she used as a weapon now grows up surrounded by people who understand the true value of integrity and mutual support. Sometimes justice looks like punishment for those who commit crimes, but sometimes justice looks like transformation. where evil intentions are redirected toward good purposes, and damaged relationships are rebuilt stronger than before. Jessica Morrison is serving 18 years in federal prison, but the real victory is that Emma will grow up in a family that chooses truth over convenience and protection over profit. If you've experienced manipulation or abuse from people you trusted, please know that the shame belongs to them, not to you. Loving someone does not require accepting their harmful behavior, and protecting yourself is not betrayal. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that people who truly care about you will respect your boundaries rather than punishing you for having them. What lessons have you learned from difficult family situations that challenged your trust? How do you balance forgiveness with protection when someone you love has been manipulated by others? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how manipulation works and how families can heal from betrayal. Thank you for listening. And remember that wisdom often comes from our most painful experiences, but only if we choose to learn and grow rather than simply survive.